Next panel is called Writing About Difference. And the whole premise is that books for children matter. All kids need to see themselves reflected and represented in their stories. In this panel, KidLit authors will discuss what diversity and difference means, evolving a definition that goes beyond ethnic and cultural identities. They will also discuss the trends and challenges of writing about difference in KidLit. So we're hoping to kind of deconstruct what diversity and difference means and get into, you know, some of the personal experiences and some of the trends that are happening
That's
with
awesome.
the diversity and difference movement in KidLit. So
I'm so excited about it. Thank you so much. This is going to be a great panel. So
absolutely.
With that, Haley, I'll go off screen and we will turn it over to Virginia and these wonderful panelists.
Super. Hello again, my lovely friends. You were back.
And you are all lovely. I know, voice from outside. You are so lovely. We love you.
So I'm gonna share my screen so that I can give you your bios. Here we are. So now we are at the Writing About Difference panel. So first we have Chris Barron. So Chris Barron's middle grade debut, All of Me, is a novel in verse. His next middle grade novel, The Magical Imperfect, comes out in 2021, and I'm particularly excited about that one for personal reasons. He is a professor of English at San Diego City College, which is actually one of my community college partners at San Diego State. So I'm excited to know him in that capacity as well. And he's also the director of the Writing Center over at City College. Chris's first book of poetry, Under the Broom Tree, was released in 2012 on City Works Press as part of Lantern Tree, 4 books of poems, which won the San Diego Book Award for Best Poetry Analogy. So I'm glad to have Chris here. And Chris, I know I'm going to say this publicly so that we make sure that it happens, but you promised to be my Viking when my T is for Thor book comes out, right? I saw a picture of Chris dressed in Viking gear, and I won't let him forget it. But anyways. Okay, so then we also have the wonderful Andrea J. Loney with us. I'm so excited. She's one of my newest best friends. We met at CSLA conference this year. She's an award-winning author of children's picture books. She earned an MFA in dramatic writing at NYU, and get this is what I think is really cool. She ran away with a traveling circus. And then she joined the Walt Disney Company. Have you guys heard of Walt Disney? No? She currently teaches computer science at LA Trade Tech School and she writes for children at various organizations around the country. Her works include Take a Picture of Me, James Vandersea, which got the NAACP award nominee, and it was also a California Reading Association Eureka winner, which I'm on the committee for, so I'm thrilled. I knew about her like years ago before she's, you know, famous now. She also has Bunny Bear, which is an ALA Rainbow List, and Double Bass Blues, which of course is getting a lot of Caldecott buzz. So we have, well, not buzz, I got the award. I got it. And then we also have Michael Mahin here with us today. Michael's always a real treat. He's got a lot of spunk. He is the Robert F. Siebert honor-winning author of When Angels Sing, the story of rock legend Carlos Santana, which he read for us earlier today. It also won the Pura Belpré honor for illustrator Jose Ramirez, and he's also the author of Muddy, the story of the blues legend Muddy Waters, which also won CRA Eureka award. So I was happy about that as well. We have a very legit award process, so it's not just my friends that win awards. Just wanted to put that out there. They just happen to be awesome. What can I say? So, and he's also included being named an NPR Best Book and a New York Times Best Illustrated Book in 2017. He enjoys writing about people who use their creativity to make the world a better place for themselves and others. He's also an actor and a screenwriter, and I was thrilled to stalk him and find that he has an IMDb account, and he's known for Queen of Crashes, Reborn, and Dot Avenue. So that's Michael Mahin. And then we have My favorite, Sally J. Pla. She's an award-winning children's author. Her books are Junior Library Guild selections that have appeared on many state awards lists and best books roundups. The Someday Birds, which will make you cry. So have a box of tissues next to you. It has such great heart. It received the 2018 Dolly Gray Children's Literature Award for its depiction of autism and disability. Benji, The Bad Day and Me was the San Diego Book Award Best Children's Book. Stanley Will Probably Be Fine was a Bank Street Kirkus and NYPL Best Book of the Year. Sally's also a neurodiversity advocate, and she believes in the beauty of different brains and in stories where different kids can see themselves, sometimes for the first time. She also runs a Novel Mind website, which is a great resource for exploring KidLit that addresses children's mental health and neurodiversity issues. And she's also a closet concert pianist whose default is Chopin. I can't even get through chopsticks, and her default is Chopin. Anyway, so I'm proud to have this wonderful panel with you today. And those of you that haven't been with us all day, I'm Virginia Loh-Hagan, and I'm currently the director of the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Center at San Diego State. And I have about 300 books out in the world about various topics, and I'm thrilled to be here with the San Diego Writers Film Festival. So I'm gonna take my stop share screen off and have a chit chat with our wonderful panel here. So we're talking about diversity. So go ahead and unmute your screen so that we can just chat. And I guess one of my first questions is, the topic of this panel is difference. Please share how you address difference in your work and why is it important to write about difference in KidLit. So we're just gonna go ahead and start with how you guys are placed in my gallery. Chris, tell us about how your book addresses difference and why was it important for you to take that on?
Oh boy, okay, first. Big question. I mean, I think there's two things that stick out to me, at least for all of me. Is the difference is I wanted to write a story about a kid who was overweight, but was still the hero of the story and really addressed, and I should qualify that by, so many times body image is a big issue, especially for boys, but it's not talked about very often. And I wanted to write a story that addressed that in a very real way, while still keeping Ari, the main character, at the center of the story, kind of as the hero of it. And certainly the book deals with everything pushed on him. And I think so many times, anyone who experiences any body image, maybe everyone in society feels a push on them about changing who they are, their body, how they look, how they appear. And certainly the character wrestles with that directly in dealing with things like diets, but that journey of discovering who they are and still being able to be an idealistic, hopeful hero throughout the story, even with a love interest, as young as they may be, to kind of find their way. And then it's mixed in with this other aspect, which is that, he's a Jewish kid who is going to be bar mitzvah, but because of his parents being so busy, they haven't done it yet. He's late, he's already 13, but he's still got to do it. And he deals with issues of anti-Semitism that are not maybe in the front, but they're systemic. They're part of the cultures that he's involved in. And so there's a lot of things happening for him. And, what I love so much about middle grade in particular is that you deal with these huge, huge issues of feeling different in very practical, kind of even can be, funny, humorous, and heart, ways. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. Michael, how does your book address difference? Or books, I should say, because you have several that do.
Well, first of all, I think books about difference are more important than ever. I think just witnessing what's going on in our country and across the globe, books that talk about human beings, right? And all of our differences are critical to how we organize and understand the world, and especially true for young minds. So like Chris and everybody on this panel, I think that's, that's where my heart is, that's where my real drive and hope is that somehow we're communicating the importance of difference, right? And being different. But also that by digging into those differences with great specificity and honoring the differences that we're exploring, that we find deep universal truths that kind of the irony I think that all as a writer you go through and you learn this along the way is that the more specific I am about differences, the more universal my story becomes. And it's a very ironic kind of like realization when you're like, wow, the more specific about how we're all different we get, somehow we stumble on to the universality of what we're talking about. And so I use or have used music, and I know Andrea does too, it looks like. I can't wait to buy your books, by the way.
Which you can do at Warwick's and any place where books are sold.
There we go. I love it. I love it. But creativity and specifically music are a way into those differences that kind of provide you a universal way in. And so for me, it's music. And then once we get past, oh, everybody loves music, and then it gives me an opportunity to talk about the core differences of these human beings, muddy waters, culture, ethnicity, class. Those tend to be recurring themes in my stories. I tend to look for outsiders, whatever that means. And this panel is about like outsider can mean so many different things. I think really what we're realizing is that insider is the real outsider, right? Those people who portray themselves as central to a culture are creating a fiction. Much of what our fiction does is speak to the reality that, hey, we're all insiders, right? That's a lot of what I hope to get at. I'm not sure I do it very well all the time, but certainly for me, that's the importance of difference and why books like ours are important.
So there was a question about Michael's doctorate. So Michael's doctorate is in English literature, and I also have a doctorate too, and my doctorate's in education, and my specialty is literacy. So both Michael and I have doctorates, but not the kind that you need if you have a medical rash or anything. So don't ask us those type of questions. But if you want to pontificate about all things academic, we're your people.
Yeah, I've been told that my PhD actually stands for pilot higher and deeper. So
right.
All right.
So Sally, tell us about how you address difference in your books. And you do a lot in all of your books, actually.
Yeah, all of my books address various aspects of neurodiversity. Their main characters and most of their characters, their brains are just wired a little bit differently. That's kind of where I come from in terms of my background. My family is just absolutely riddled with people on various places of the autism spectrum and ADHD, and that deal with mental health issues. And I myself have a diagnosis of autism. It's something that mattered to me so much because raising my boys, there just weren't very many stories, or there was just this one story where there would be a book, either a picture book or a middle grade novel about the main character, usually a girl, has an extremely annoying autistic brother, and the tragedy of that autistic character and overcoming that, having this, this trial in the family to deal with. And what do you know, at the end they understand and they develop compassion, and it's all about that main character developing compassion and the autistic character, the neurodivergent character, just being the catalyst for this, what's called disability porn, basically. This started to bother me so extremely that it really was the impetus for me to start writing. Overall, I think things are really improving. I see more and more books coming out that are just wonderful and that are approaching things in many different ways. I've often said that children deserve the validation of seeing themselves accurately and respectfully represented in a book. But I think that I'd like to change that. That's always been sort of my mission catchphrase. And not just in a book. Children deserve to see themselves accurately and respectfully represented in many, many different stories, in many, many different kinds of books. And I like to point people also to that wonderful notion of the danger of the single story that Chimamanda Adichie has this wonderful YouTube video about, and maybe we can stick it in the notes somewhere, a link to it. But yeah, you know, just one story about somebody that's different, that's not enough. You know, that doesn't sum it up. That just gives you a stereotype. So we need lots more of these stories, and I'd encourage aspiring children's writers out there to just do it. You know, just go for it and write the story of your heart and get it out there so that kids can have their stories.
Can you tell us, Sally, about your website? I want to make sure that people know about that too.
Yeah.
Mind.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a licensed therapist as well as a children's book author. Her name's Miriam Saunders. That two of us put together, and now it's grown quite a bit. We have a staff of 4. It's called anovelmind.com, anovelmind.com. And what it is it's just a resource for exploring neurodiversity and mental health issues in children's literature. So we have a searchable database on that website for librarians or writers or teachers or whoever, you know, wants to look at it as a resource. There's over 1,000 books there that are searchable by disability, you know, by mental health issue, you know, whether it's a book that's BIPOC or a book that's own voices, LGBTQ, you know, all those different, there are all kinds of different search criteria on there of ways to find books for kids. So if you have a high schooler that has an eating disorder and you want a young adult book about that, you can search that. If you have a preschooler, you know, that has anxiety, you can look for books, you know, appropriate for that. So that's a resource. And we also have weekly blog posts with guest writers that are some of the most preeminent kids book writers today. So that's going. We took a break for the summer, but the guest blogs are going to start up again in a few weeks.
Great, thank you. That's wonderful. So we have also Andrea here, and please, I know that am I saying your name right? Because I know that you have about 3 friends in your circle that all have the same name and they all say it differently. So please correct me.
There's a diversity in the pronunciation of the name Andrea. I go by Andrea unless someone is from New Jersey or possibly Texas, and it just comes out Andrea, and I'm like, hey, okay, good. My family members call me different things. Let's see. So diversity and differences, I think, has been important to me since I was very young, in the sense that my mom's side of the family has been in the United States since traced all the way back to the 1700s, probably beyond there. My dad's side of the family, he came here when he was, I don't know, like maybe 12 or 13 from Panama. And his mom was Jamaican. So that whole Afro-Latino side of my family, very different than the US side of my family. And then I grew up when I was very young in a neighborhood. I used to always say it's like Sesame Street without the monsters. Completely multicultural, learning different languages, seeing lots of different kids, all that stuff. And then when I was in the 2nd grade, we moved to a town that was, we were one of like maybe just a handful of Black families in that town. For most of my classes, I was never in a classroom with more than maybe 1 or 2 other Black people, to the point where I got to NYU and I'm like, wow, look at all of us. And they're like, she's so weird. And you know, like, I was just like blown away, you know? So, so it's something that's definitely been a part of my experience as a child. So when I write for children, I'm writing from that little 2nd grader looking around going, everybody says that I'm different, but I'm just me. And they say that they're different, but they're just them, and trying to understand that. As an educator, I was a substitute teacher, I think from 2014 to 2016. I spent a lot of time with children reading books to them about people who look like none of us in the room. Most of the students that I teach here in Los Angeles are Black and Latino. Occasionally some Asian students. Occasionally I might teach some white children, but it just doesn't seem to show up in the schools that I go into. It's almost like Brown versus Board of Education didn't really happen sometimes. And for all my feelings about that, I just want there to be books about the kids that I'm in the room with. You know, I mean, we can read about everybody and we can connect to everybody and understand everybody because, you know, we're all about the human experience, but I would like to see more of that. So that's part of why my books are about a character who's trying to find their way in the world, in a world that sees them as different. And usually the character says, okay, well, I'm different because I'm meant to stand out, or I'm different because I just need to find my group, or I'm different because I'm just different and that's okay. But I think that that's really important, just like on a developmental level, where like I remember when my sister has 6 kids and I have none because my sister has 6 of them. So it'd be
Oh, wow, yeah.
they all just look like me and sound like I outsource motherhood to this
Sure.
in New Jersey. So I remember when her kids would start kindergarten, because they're their own little society in their house, because there's so many of them, and they would just be blown away by what all the other kids did and how they spoke, or how, you know, like, and it's interesting how early childhood is so much about learning how to manage differences and where you fit in or where you can fit in, who you bring in and who you exclude and why you exclude them. It is important to have all these stories out there at this point in their development so that they don't necessarily grow into adults who are afraid of everything that doesn't seem familiar to them, because that makes this entire universe a very small space for them, and we want them to have their big space.
Sure. I like that idea of outsourcing kids. I think
It's very effective.
I'm married to, you know, Jeff, 6'6" white guy. Chris, you're married to an Asian woman. I'm just going to outsource kids to you because you guys have half Asian, half white kids, right? All right, that's your responsibility now.
Okay, that sounds great. I've got nothing else to do, so it works out. Works out.
Is it okay to outsource the kids that I already have?
Oh, wow. Well, you know, in my books too, the way that I address difference is I tend to, with my picture books, my trade books, and my mid-grade novel, it tends to be around being Chinese American. So, and because I've got a book about Paper Sun, you know, the Angel Island immigration story. I've got 2 books about the Chinese New Year. And then I've got the mid-grade novel with Carolyn Marsden, published by Candlewick. The rest of my books are published by Sleeping Bear Press. But that book is a semi-autobiographical, you know, telling of my life growing up. So they've been somewhat about the Chinese culture. And so I've kind of stuck with own voices. And that's kind of where the next question that I want to bring in, because I don't think we can have a conversation about difference and diversity without addressing own voices. And I do also want to say, and I forgot to say this earlier, we want to make this interactive as possible. So please, our audience members out there, if you have questions, please write them in the chat for Facebook, and you know, we'll definitely try to get to them. So you feel free to ask questions. But anyways, so I want to go back to this hashtag own voices. So for those of you that don't know about the hashtag own voices, it's this idea that authors of color write their own stories. Or not just authors of color, but you know, if you're authors of difference. So if you're writing your own stories about your difference and your diversity. And so I just kind of want to get some thoughts about that. So we'll start with Michael.
Yeah, I think I'm a good one to start with because I'm not writing own voices necessarily. So I'm coming from an artistic point of view, looking at stories that I think are important. My own culture is a curious one. I am half Chinese. I pass for Latin. I pass for Italian. I pass for Latinx. I pass for you know, majority culture Caucasian. I'm half Irish, so I come by it honestly, but I've never experienced the outsider nature of racism. And so for me, it's important that I think it's important to say that like own voices are critical, right? But this really can't be an either or opposition or binary. It's not just own voices can write these stories. It's not just, we have to as artists be able to write the stories that we feel are important to us and that we feel that we can tell. I of course think it's critical for any writer to find a way in and a connection point to the stories that they tell. And I do that through music. I'm a musician. I've been a professional musician for several years. My claim to fame being in an all 80s cover band for quite a while.
Okay, I'm learning lots of fun facts that I will be using.
Yeah, you can hold that against me. There was no spandex involved, so you can search the web. But anyway, so I think these are critical conversations to have. I think that we need to generally avoid the kind of Fox News binary that we tend to get sucked into, which is that it can only be this, it can only be this. Because that undermines the whole idea of exploring difference. And I think that we have to allow for the fact that own voices are critical, but it's also important for artists and people to think outside of their comfort zones and to explore cultures and to tell stories that need to be told. I understand that there's a power differential, which is really where the own voices movement comes out of. And it's the distinction between who gets to tell these stories. It's important not to be co-opting cultures and appropriating them for your own specific purposes. But on the other hand, it's important that we don't use racism to teach people that racism is bad. We have to be critical of ourselves as we explore these stories, I think. So anyway, sorry for rambling on.
Sure. Andrea, I'm gonna have you follow up.
And counterpoint, no wait, okay.
Point, counterpoint.
Right. Honestly, I will say that my feelings on this and my opinion on this has kind of like shifted through my time in the industry, and I haven't been in the industry that long. My first book was published in 2017. So
and yet in 2020, she won a Caldecott.
I had to get it in there. But I will tell you from my personal experience of own voices, which may be different than other people's experiences. It is very powerful to go to visit kids in a library who maybe have not seen authors before and have definitely not seen Black authors before, and open up my book and then and I'm here to read to you. And I'm a teacher, I have a teacher voice, I know this. They think I'm a teacher, they think I'm a librarian. I say I'm an author and it's like, whoa. But when I show them my picture, something really interesting happens. They look at me, they look at that picture, and then they kind of look at themselves, and it changes how they see themselves, particularly if it's a child who looks like me. And to me, that is so important as far as the whole own voices thing, because I think that, I know when I was growing up, there were some books about Black children. There weren't that many. There weren't as many as there are now, and there weren't as many as there could be. There still aren't as many as there could be. But it took a while to understand that I could write my own story, because so much was written in that case, let's say by white men, by white women. And I don't want to give children the idea that they don't get to tell their own stories. And that's why it's so important for me to do things like author visits and, and just see kids and just be like, look here, I was second grade like you and I did it. And what do you want to do with your life? And I think that part makes a difference as far as it being an own voices author. The other thing is, I feel like I've seen some books written by people who were not people, by POC people, who I don't know that they could necessarily define something like double consciousness, in the sense that I've read things written specifically by white people who think that people of color look at ourselves the way white people look at us. And our eyes are on the other side of our faces. You know what I mean? We're looking out at the world. We're not like, she looked in the mirror and contemplated how different she was. It like, you know, like I read things like that, and it infuriates me, not for me, because I'm a grown up and I can afford therapy. It's all good. But I think about some kid in a classroom, like how I was a kid in a classroom where I was the different one in a classroom, and someone says, hey, here's a book about you, and the whole class is going to read it. And then they get to something that's so misrepresentative of me, or my culture, you know, my gender identity, or whatever it is. And everybody looks, and the kid thinks, is that what they think about me? Mm-hmm. Is that how they see me? Or worse yet, the kid thinks, is that what I really am? And that's the part that breaks my heart. So for those reasons, I personally would prefer for some less represented authors and illustrators to be able to have access to the publishing industry, so that the kids who are in my classrooms can have stories written about them by people who get their lives. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to do that, but it has to be important enough to the person making that book to say, I don't want to fail this kid. And I don't always get that people are doing that. I've had friends, dear friends, who will say, well, this is just how the story came to me, Andrea. And I'm like, that's like really offensive. Like, no, but this is how it came across to me. And it's my creativity. I'm like, I understand, writers gotta write, you gotta try stuff out. But the end result of what you wrote is those kids who were reading that were kind of like, ugh, you know, and it's about the kids, not about us.
Yeah.
Right.
So I want to get both Chris and Sally's perspective on own voices, but you touched upon another topic that I want to talk about, which is how we get it right. So I want to come back to that, but I do want to get Chris and Sally's perspective, and then, but I wanted to quickly share too, like your story that you opened with, your anecdote reminded me of, my first book came out around like 2006, 2008, and I was doing some book tours, etc. And at that time I was also teaching, I don't know, second or third grade, I don't remember. But I remember my students had said, we were reading a book out loud, and the students had said something like, oh man, I wish I knew a real life author. And I said, oh my God, I'm with you every day. But it's this idea, you know, that you're too known to them, so they don't see you in that way. So yes, it is important. I absolutely agree with you. It's important for kids to see, you know, people of color in as authors out there. Sally, can I get your perspective on our own voices?
Yeah, I think what Andrea just said really resonated with me so much. I totally am with you on it. I think there are dangers in bad representation that really that should be red flags that we should be aware of. You know, it is so important to get it right. If you are not writing own voices, if that is not your authentic reality that you're writing about, it is tremendous work that you will have to do to get it right. And you must, in good conscience and with all respect and care, do that work. You have to get your sensitivity readers. You have to do your homework. You know, and even then, I would say it would be probably better to let's lift up the people of own voices. Let's let the publishing industry make space for them, because their voices have been ignored for far too long and in the minority for far too long. Their voices need to be lifted up, and there needs to be room made for them. So I'm a huge proponent of own voices. I think it's really important for the authenticity and I've had that experience of being infuriated by bad representation too, and it hurts. It like burns inside, you know, especially if there aren't even that many stories out there, and the stories being told about you don't reflect you, or not showing the world you the way you feel you are. And then that's a really hard thing for a kid. It's a hard thing for anyone. So room needs to be made for so many new different stories, and we need to make room for own voices.
And that kind of goes along with a lot of the, like Dr. Ibram Kendi's stance on anti-racism, like this idea that we have to balance the scales and make room. It's not enough just to be neutral and non-racist, but we have to be anti-racist. So we have to put in, we have to, like you said, make room.
Yeah.
So Chris, do you want to respond to Own Voices?
Sure. I mean, these are all, no, but yes. These are all mic drop responses. I just did, I teach creative writing at the college, and I do an assignment where the students write dramatic monologue or persona poems, and they take on the voice of someone else, someone very other than them. And it is so interesting from all angles to hear their feedback on that exercise. It is so hard to do it and do it well. So that's been an interesting exercise to try it out, to understand just how deeply difficult it is. The only thing I would say add to this conversation, which I agree with almost everything that people have said here, as someone who is writing a book with, because I know my own voices is, like this New York Jewish kid named Chris, and writing from my own perspective. But in my next book, there are, it is about Angel Island and immigration, and about a town kind of where there are a lot of immigrants. And the main character is, a Jewish kid whose grandparents were immigrants from, that came from Prague during the war and that kind of thing. But there are also other characters, primarily Filipino characters, and a family that's a part of the story. And I had a deep, deep responsibility, kind of, everyone's alluding to this, Sally especially, I agree, that I did more research than writing for this book. And these are not even main, these are sub-main characters, but I had to get everything right. I talked to my whole family, my wife, I have a built-in sensitivity reader. I bugged Virginia, like every single aspect of this story, I wanted to get it right. I became really close to the Filipino American History Society, bugged them like crazy, did a ton of reading. And I'm still nervous about that part because of my goal, is to represent them, not as the champion of that, but just as I want them to be part of the story, because we need to be writing these stories and sharing them. But I think there's a great responsibility that comes when we take that on. And it's not easy. That's what I would say, that it was a ton of work, and it continues to be, and I'm still on it, so that I can best represent the sort of own voices in my own story of the main character. But I have to get the other voices as right as I can. And it's a big, big choice to do something like that.
And I just want to say too, like, Chris, you never bug me. So and I wanted to say, like, I think that's important. Like when Chris did reach out to me, I thought I respected you and your work more for doing that. Knowing, like, trying to get it right. And I think that's what we're all trying to do, is trying to get it right. And like I mentioned, so some of my stories are about being Chinese. And although I am Chinese, I have my perspective of what it's like to be Chinese. And specifically, I'm American born Chinese, which is a whole different thing in the Chinese culture. But in writing these books about Chinese themes, I had to do a lot of research. To go back and learn about my own voices. And even with the mid-grade novel, that was set in the 80s, which, a funny thing, today it's categorized as historical fiction for second grade readers, which I don't see my life as historical fiction, but anyways. So it's like, even then I had to go back and get the details right, because I mentioned like Smurfs or something, and it's like, was Smurfs even on during that time? So it's like, you have to go back and spend a lot of time getting the details right. And my dissertation was on actually the cultural authenticity of Asian American children's lit. And one of the things that and Own Voices has been something that I researched back when, and now it's become, this great big phenomena that's extremely important. And one of the things that I found was we can actually, I don't want to say there's a formula, but we know how to get it right. There, research, immersion, there's experiences that you can, sensitivity readers, checkers, all that stuff. There are ways to get the information right. We know that. But the difference is with the idea of cultural authenticity is our voices is important politically. because culturally, according to the cultural authenticity, we can actually get that. We can get that from different ways, and mainly from research. But what's important in this moment right now, and we always have to meet the moment, right? But what's important right now is the political reasons for why we have our own voices. And I think, you know, Sally, you brought this up too. It's like making space. So it's prioritizing, centering, not eliminating. And, you know, I agree with Michael where, like, I don't want to only write about Chinese girls. You know, I mean, I want to write about other things, and I know I can get it right from research. But politically, it's important to center certain voices. So I think that it's interesting that we can have those two conversations. It's layered. You know, there's political reason, and then there's, you know, the cultural authenticity reason. But anyways, so why, and Chris, you've shared already too about how, you know, you had, like, I checked your stuff, and, you know, we talked about it, and you did research around it, you used your wife. But how are, you know, Michael, Andrea, and Sally, what are some other ways that you worked to get it right? So we'll start with Michael.
You know, I had Chris talks about research, right? That's, you got to start with digging deep into stuff and doing your due diligence. I think that, you know, Sally is absolutely right. And Chris said this too, you have a tremendous responsibility to try to get it right. But as we all know, and as, you know, Virginia alluded to, we can even get ourselves wrong. Right. So at a certain point, we have to push it on to people. And, you know, for me, I have the benefit of being at a major publishing house. And so they knew right off the bat. And the first thing I said to them, especially with my Muddy Waters book, was I need people to read this who can, you know, be culturally sensitive to it, to make sure that I have represented Muddy Waters fairly and accurately. And spent a lot of time listening to those readers, and, you know, taking what they suggested and integrating that into the story to make sure that it was good, because I understood the responsibility that I was undertaking. For me, it was such an important story that nobody had written about, that it needed to be told. And so I was inspired from a personal connection to music, and personal connection to the blues specifically. And all those things, I think, provided access, but they didn't provide the answers to, you know, Muddy Waters' experience of racism. I just would never be able to speak to that in a way that was accurate and fair. And so it was important, you know, to get those readers. And I'm glad that I think across the publishing spectrum, they understand this now. And the importance of getting outside eyes on it. But that's the main thing, you know, for me, is getting those outside eyes, I think.
Sure, great, thank you. Sally, what about you? What do you do to get it right?
Yeah, speaking of outside eyes and sensitivity readers, I thought it was kind of interesting. I have a picture book with Lee and Loh called Benji, The Bad Day and Me. It's a kind of a sibling rivalry book about two brothers. One of them is autistic, and the others just had this like horrible day. And they kind of butt heads a while, and then they finally find their way to brotherly peace in kind of an interesting way. Anyway, even though I'm writing from personal experience, basically that's like my son Nate, and that was my son Andrew. I mean, this really was a personal story of our family, our very neurodivergent family, personal experience, own voices book. Lee and Loh still got a sensitivity reader, an autistic sensitivity reader, to read my book. And I was super glad for it. I was a little amused at first, to be honest. I was like, really? But it was good. And she came up with some really great points on way to improve the story and be even more careful. And so I think that I'm just relating that little story, because I think no matter what you're writing or how authentic you think you're being, you can benefit from having it checked, from having a sensitivity reader, for making sure that people that are, you know, within the community you're writing about take a look.
Sure. Well, and I think it goes back to, I want to bring back something Michael said too. It's like, we might be writing about specific lived experiences, but ultimately our stories do have universal themes. So like, our one lived experience, although we can be specific in the details, there's a humanity, a common humanity that we all have. So I think hearing outside voices, hearing external, internal voices would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think the whole point is to be able to write a story that's so seamless and feels so true that the reader, no matter who the reader is, can slip inside the shoes of your main character, slip inside their skin, and really feel like they're having an authentic experience. And that's a human, universal experience. It absolutely is.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, Andrea. I would just add that when we speak of universal experiences, it's also important I'm going to argue on the other side now. It's also important we don't hide behind the universal theme as a way to cover the fact that we're writing about specific people in places, in cultures, in times. And that I see as a very dangerous way to take a book like Muddy Waters and to whitewash it, right? To put it in the classroom and say, hey, this is just about a musician and music is a universal theme. So I speak at length and try to, make a point when people take that book. They say, hey, this is about universal themes, but it's also about a very specific historical context about an African-American man who grew up as a sharecropper, who suffered through the racism in the Deep South, who managed to raise himself above that by his own hard work and efforts. So it's tricky, it's complicated, right? We want to say universal, but we have to be careful about not losing the specificity at the same time.
Well,
Sorry.
we don't want to, there's the danger of stereotypes. We also don't want to, right? So Andrea, go, what do you think? How do you make sure you get it right?
Well, one of the things that I started doing early on when I got into KidLit is I got I belong to several different critique groups, mostly because I need to learn how to say the word no more, I think. But because I love all of them and I want to be involved with all of them. But the cool thing about it is one of the critique groups that I'm in, I think of, even though it wasn't necessarily started this way, as let's say my diversity critique group, where it's people of different races, ethnicities, sexual orientations, religions, just it's this whole gamut of people. And when we bring our work up, we get to see eyes on, we get to, nobody in that particular critique group is a white male or even a white person in that one, I think. So the eyes that we see on it are looking at it in a very specific way. And then after I've shown that critique group something, I show it to another critique group, and I do belong to another critique group that is, I believe, yeah, it's all white, mostly white women. And the things that, and also there's illustrators in that group, which is amazing because they see story in a completely different way than I do. And they're all amazing and brilliant, and I love them all. But there are certain things that I will bring to them that they don't see it because they've never really been in that otherized situation except as female. So, and that's important because even if my first critique group thinks something's great, I still need to get it through publishing. And, publishing tends to be primarily white, white people, white women or whatever. So if I'm writing about something that I'm not writing in a way that they're going to get it, then I need to look at it and be like, okay, wait a minute, how can I explain this, or how can I set this up so that, everybody's on board for this story? So yeah, and then I have another critique group of people who are all over the world, actually. And I get input from lots of different people. So yeah, that's basically it. Trying to get lots of input from different people. When I work on characters and story, particularly for something like biographies, which I totally admit, if you love history, it's really hard not to write about the people who you love. It's no matter who they are. Yeah. So I totally get that. And that also speaks to what Chris was talking about, doing that exercise with the students, because I do see how writing, learning how to write somebody else is important to learn how to write about yourself. and to learn how to write like that. These are important exercises to do. It just comes down to, again, the political aspect of, you know, what's going on right now and publishing. And that's where my, you know, boosting own voices comes from. But I do think that it's important to look at things like what is happening in the 3 dimensions around your character and how is your character dealing with that? And then also, where's the you in the character that you're writing? Like pretty much any biography that I write because I connect so deeply to that person who lived however many years ago. And this aspect of me feels like this aspect of them. And I want to like be the version of me that existed in this world, and that, you know, by telling their story.
Sure.
You know?
So we have a couple minutes left. Chris, is there something that you'd like to add? I know that we talked about some of the things that you've done, but is there something else you'd like to add?
I'm not sure. I feel like I'm learning so much. I'm taking all these notes because I
Wait,
just,
hold on. I saw a doodle there. That's not all notes.
that's how I take notes. I doodle. That's a different panel, right? Doodling to learn. No, I think that this is fascinating to me. You know, and as I find like writing is so much about learning. And I was thinking about old manuscripts as we go and characters I want to explore and learn about. And I think every time as writers that we go forward with something, we have to be really open to learning what it means and how to bring people up in a positive light. Just kind of like the idea, like I think finding the you in characters is so vital across cultural spectrums of all kinds. I was just thinking about this, that there's other subcultures that are also own voices related. I was just thinking like in this next book of mine, there's, you know, it's during the 89 World Series. And by the way, baseball is an own voices culture in some ways. I mean, not to put it on the same level, but you know what I'm saying? You have to really know what you're talking about in baseball. That took an incredible amount of research. And I think just a lot of learning all the time to kind of bring people into the right place, to understand them better, to understand where we fit into those stories and why we're there. I feel like it's an incredible opportunity all the time.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off that too, I think it's one of the big things to get it right is do your research. You know, like research, read. I don't know how many times I've had to tell, you know, novice writers, like read. If you're not a reader, you can't be a writer. And if you want to be a KidLit author, but you don't read KidLit books, then you're not going to be a KidLit author. You have to read in the genre in which you want to write. So reading and doing your research is extremely important to this process. And you want to, you know, I think we're always constantly trying to get it right. And I know that I'm not the only one that feels this way, but it's like, you know, your books are published and then you read them out loud and then you're like, oh, dang. Wish I could have changed that, but it's gone. I mean, it's already out there, so you can't go back. But, you know, I think we're always constantly learning and reading and writing and researching. So that just has to be part of the process, and having conversations, because I'm also, and I know I'm speeding up because I know that we're having to close down, but I also think it's really important when we have conversations about diversity and diverse and different books is that we don't censor. Even books that are problematic are open for conversations. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, you know, they're springboards and we need to explore why they're problematic. Mm-hmm. Not just not read them, but there is a time that it was written in a political, social time. So we need to consider that context. So I want to plug that. And I also know that I have a comment here from Ala Ramaswamy, and excuse me for your, I know I mispronounced your name, but she mentioned, my kids were very upset about images of Russians in movies and elsewhere. It's not about racism. And I want to say that that's exactly, I think, one of my dreams with this panel. And that's why I was purposeful about focusing on difference and having, like, for example, Chris here to talk about, you know, male body image, and Sally neurodiversity. And I mean, like, I do believe in my own definition of diversity and difference, that it goes beyond just ethnic and cultural, you know, cultural identifications. But I think that the world is made up of lots of different people, so that's important. And then another question, just real quick, from Allah as well. Do you think it is of interest and importance to have a book of kids, immigrants with different languages? Bilingual books are, and that's what I think you're meaning. If not, then I'm sorry, but I'm thinking that you're asking about the importance of bilingual books. Bilingual books are extremely important, especially in today's multilingual society. So yes, bilingual books are extremely important. All right, and I see Jennifer's here, so we're getting the hook.
No, I'm not. I just wanted to join the conversation. I'm not rushing you along. This is such an important conversation. All of you have been absolutely phenomenal. So thank you for bringing your voice to the San Diego Writers Festival and to all of our viewers. I think this topic, it's always important, but I think it's especially important right now with everything that's happening. And you know, we at the San Diego Writers Festival stand behind Black Lives Matter. The whole reason for the festival is that we want to support and foster accessibility, inclusivity, and we want people to feel like, yeah, my voice matters. And I wanted to tell a quick story. Last year was our inaugural year at the downtown public library. And we had a panel called Black Lives Matter. And afterward, this woman walked up to me, and she was Nigerian. And she was literally in tears. And she said, I just want to thank you and let you know, I didn't think anyone cared about my story. And I was kind of blown away. I'm like, yes, you have to tell your story. You know, this own voices is so important. I mean, there's been some riffraff that's happened in Latinx, as we all know. We won't get into it unless anyone wants to comment. But, you know, it's just so important for people to feel like, I have a story to tell. And there's people out there who need to hear that story, because storytelling creates empathy. And all of you are just so, honestly, Virginia, I'm like, I don't want to stop this. I want this to keep going. So,
well, you know, authors, we can go on all day long. So that's
right.
no problem. But I do want to say, Jennifer, just to piggyback off your comment about the importance of storytelling, books are not the only way to tell your story.
Oh, no, this is the San Diego Writers Festival, not the book festival.
YouTube, I mean, there's so blogs, there's so many different ways to tell your stories.
Music,
of course, how could I forget music? But it's not, you know, there are so many ways, and it's, it doesn't have to be in a bound version.
A bound book.
There's so
the
many
pictures are fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. You make a really good point, Virginia, because YouTube is such a huge way that is bringing kids into storytelling. And there's so many different types of storytelling that's really getting kids excited. And poetry, graphic novels, movies, you know, screenplay writing. We had some wonderful screenplay writers in our last program 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I mean, we all have something to say. I think all of you are amazing. Andrea, I want to apologize. Did I say that right? Andrea? I pronounced your name wrong earlier in the day. I was like, I knew I pronounced someone's name wrong.
I did too. And
I'm not Texan either, although I can pretend if it makes everyone feel better. So once again, thank you all. We'll let everyone go about your day. I hope you'll continue to join us. And Virginia and I will stay on and talk about this next panel. But thank you all so much. Incredible. Wow. So these, yeah. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Wow. Seriously, that was just badass. I said it.
There was
badass.